The sharp crack of a hammer against nail pierced the Montana morning air as Hope Richards stared at the shabby homestead that was supposed to be her future. 3 months she had waited, letters clutched to her chest like precious gems, for the man who had promised her a life of security and companionship. Now she stood alone, her trunk at her feet, facing the bitter reality that Edmund Blake would never come. The year was 1883, and the small town of Silver Creek, Montana Territory, seemed a world away from the crowded streets of Boston where Hope had spent her 22 years. The daughter of a seamstress, Hope had answered an advertisement in the newspaper after her mother's passing left her with no family and few prospects. Edmund's letters had painted pictures of a modest but comfortable home, a small ranch with potential, and a man eager to build a life with a woman who valued hard work and loyalty over passion. "Miss, you planning on standing there all day?" The wagon driver who had brought her from the train station shifted impatiently. "Got other deliveries to make." "I apologize," Hope said, pulling her shawl tighter against the autumn chill. I expected someone to be here." The driver, an older man with a weathered face, sighed. "That Blake place been empty near 2 months now." Hope's heart sank further. 2 months, but his last letter. She trailed off, remembering the date on the final correspondence she'd received, April. It was now September. "Fever took him," the driver said bluntly. "Lot of folks got sick this past spring. Doctor couldn't save 'em all." The news struck Hope like a physical blow. She hadn't loved Edmund, they'd never even met, but she had invested her hopes in the future he promised. She had sold what little she owned, spent nearly everything she had on the train ticket west, and now stood before an empty house that belonged to a dead man. "Is there somewhere in town I might stay?" she asked, her voice remarkably steady despite the panic rising in her chest. The driver scratched his beard. "Town's small, but Mrs. Sullivan runs a boarding house. Might have a room, can't promise it'll be cheap though." Hope nodded, eyes still fixed on the cabin. "I would appreciate a ride back to town then." As the driver loaded her trunk back onto the wagon, Hope took one last look at what might have been her home. The small garden was overgrown with weeds, the porch sagged at one corner, and a curtain fluttered through a broken window. Edmund's death was tragic, but she couldn't mourn a man she'd never known. Instead, she mourned the future that had died with him. Mrs. Sullivan's boarding house sat at the edge of Silver Creek's Main Street, a 2-story building painted a faded blue. The middle-aged widow charged Hope for a week's lodging, leaving her with barely enough money for food, let alone a ticket back east. "I'll need to find work," Hope told Mrs. Sullivan as she unpacked her meager belongings in the small attic room. "Not much for a woman to do here except cooking, cleaning, or working at the saloon," Mrs. Sullivan replied, smoothing the quilt on the narrow bed. "Though I heard Sheriff Danvers' wife is looking for help with their new baby." Hope nodded. She could cook and clean, and she was an excellent seamstress thanks to her mother's teaching. "I'll start asking around tomorrow." That evening, Hope sat by the window of her room, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson. She removed Edmund's letters from her satchel, rereading words that now seemed like ghosts of promises. Tomorrow she would have to forge a new path for herself in this strange, wild place. Dawn found Hope dressed in her second-best dress, hair neatly pinned, ready to seek employment. Silver Creek's Main Street consisted of the essential businesses any frontier town needed. A general store, a saloon, a small bank, the sheriff's office, and a handful of other establishments. People glanced curiously at her as she passed, clearly marking her as an outsider. She had just inquired at the general store, no positions available, when she collided with a solid wall of a man exiting the building. Strong hands steadied her before she could stumble. "Careful there, madam," said a deep voice. Hope looked up into the face of a tall man with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His dark blonde hair was slightly too long, and several days' worth of stubble covered his strong jaw. He wore the practical clothing of a rancher, worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms, and dusty boots. "I apologize," Hope said, stepping back. "I wasn't watching where I was going." The man's hands fell away from her arms, but his eyes remained on her face. "No harm done. You must be new in town. Ethan Forrester." He tipped his hat slightly. "Hope Richards. I arrived yesterday. Visiting family." Hope hesitated. "Not exactly. I came to marry Edmund Blake, but I've just learned he passed away." Ethan's expression softened. "I'm sorry to hear that. Ed was a good man. You knew him. Our ranches border each other, not that mine's much to look at these days." A shadow crossed his face. "Been a hard couple of years." "I see." Hope didn't know what else to say. "Well, I should continue. I'm looking for work." Ethan studied her for a moment. "What kind of work are you trained for?" "I'm a seamstress by trade, but I can cook and clean as well. I'm not afraid of hard work." Something flickered in Ethan's eyes. Consideration, perhaps. "My sister's getting married next month. Been pestering me about finding someone to help with her dress alterations. You interested?" Hope's spirits lifted. "Yes, absolutely. I would be grateful for the opportunity." "Good. She's out at my ranch now, helping me with the cattle. I'll bring her into town tomorrow, and you two can discuss the details." He paused. "Where are you staying?" "Mrs. Sullivan's boarding house." Ethan nodded. "I'll come by around noon if that suits you." "That would be fine, Mr. Forrester." "Thank you." As Ethan walked away, Hope allowed herself a moment of relief. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it was a thread to follow in the tangled web her life had become. True to his word, Ethan arrived at the boarding house the next day with a young woman who introduced herself as Clara Forrester. "Oh, thank goodness," Clara exclaimed after examining Hope's sample stitching. "The seamstress in the next town over is booked solid, and I was beginning to think I'd have to wear this dress as is." She gestured to the gown she'd brought, a beautiful cream-colored creation that needed taking in at the waist and shortening at the hem. Hope smiled. "I'd be happy to help." "When is the wedding?" "4 weeks from Saturday," Clara replied. "My fiancé, Thomas, is the town doctor. We're hoping to build a house in town, but for now, I'm staying with my brother." She glanced at Ethan, who had remained silent, leaning against the doorframe of Mrs. Sullivan's parlor. 4 weeks gives us plenty of time," Hope assured her. They discussed payment, and Hope was relieved to find Clara's offer generous enough to cover another 2 weeks at the boarding house. As Clara gathered up her dress, Ethan stepped forward. "Miss Richards, I have another proposition for you if you're interested." Hope looked at him questioningly. "My ranch hands are capable enough, but none of them can cook worth a damn, pardon my language. The house needs attention too. Would you consider coming out to work at the ranch? There's a small cabin you could use, meals included, plus wages." Hope blinked in surprise. "You're offering me a position as your housekeeper?" "Cook, housekeeper, whatever you want to call it," Ethan said with a shrug. "It's not fancy work, but it's honest, and you'd have a place of your own." "Ethan, that's perfect," Clara exclaimed. "And I'll be right there to work on my dress fittings." Hope considered the offer. A cabin of her own would save her the boarding house fees, and regular meals would be a blessing. Still, she hesitated. "I'm not familiar with ranch life, Mr. Forrester." "You'll learn," he said simply, "and it's Ethan. Mr. Forrester was my father." Clara touched Hope's arm. "Please say yes. My brother's cooking might actually kill us all." That drew a reluctant smile from Hope. "When would you want me to start?" "Tomorrow," Ethan said promptly. I'll come by in the morning with the wagon." After they left, Mrs. Sullivan offered her opinion without being asked. Forrester's place was one of the best ranches in the county before the drought and that trouble with the cattle thieves. He's had a run of bad luck, but he's a good man. Stubborn as they come, though. Hope nodded thoughtfully. "Do you think it's proper for me to accept such a position?" Mrs. Sullivan laughed. "Proper? Girl, this is the frontier. People do what needs doing to survive. Besides, with his sister there as chaperone, no one will think twice about it." The next morning, Hope packed her belongings once more. When Ethan's wagon pulled up, she was ready, her heart a mixture of anxiety and determination. The ride to the Forrester ranch took nearly an hour, during which Ethan pointed out landmarks and explained a little about his operation. "Used to run over 500 head of cattle," he told her. "Down to about 200 now after the drought killed off my best grazing land and thieves took a good portion of what was left. Been rebuilding slowly." Hope studied his profile as he spoke, noting the stubborn set of his jaw and the way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon, as if expecting trouble. "It sounds difficult," she said. Ethan glanced at her. "Life out here usually is, but it has its rewards." As if to illustrate his point, they crested a hill, and Hope caught her breath. Below them stretched the Forrester ranch, a sprawling main house built of sturdy logs, several outbuildings, corrals containing horses, and beyond, rolling grassland that seemed to stretch forever beneath the vast blue sky. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "It can be," Ethan agreed, a note of pride in his voice. He showed her to the cabin, small but solid, with a bed, table, 2 chairs, and a pot-bellied stove. It sat about 50 yards from the main house, close enough to be convenient but far enough for privacy. "It's not much," Ethan said, setting down her trunk. "It's more than enough," Hope assured him, already envisioning how she could make it comfortable. The first week passed in a blur of adjustments. Hope learned the rhythms of ranch life, rising before dawn to prepare breakfast for Ethan and his 4 ranch hands. She scrubbed the neglected main house until it gleamed, mended torn shirts and pants, and spent her afternoons working on Clara's wedding dress. Ethan was often absent during daylight hours, busy with the endless tasks of running the ranch. When their paths did cross, their interactions were brief but increasingly comfortable. Hope found herself watching for him, noting the way his face softened when he spoke to his sister or patted his favorite horse. One evening, as Hope served a stew she'd prepared, Ethan actually smiled at her, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his usually serious face. "This might be the best meal I've had in 2 years," he declared, reaching for a second helping. Hope felt herself blush. "It's just a simple stew. After living on burnt beans and tough biscuits, this is a feast." He studied her for a moment. "You settling in all right?" "Yes," Hope replied honestly. "It's different from what I'm used to, but I like the openness here, the way you can see for miles." Ethan nodded. "That's what kept me going after my parents died this land. Hard to give up on something so beautiful." That night in her cabin, Hope thought about Edmund Blake and the life she'd thought she would have. Somehow, in just a week, that dream had begun to fade like morning mist, replaced by the solid reality of her new surroundings. The following Saturday, Clara invited Hope to join her and Ethan for a ride to check on the cattle in the north pasture. "I don't know how to ride," Hope confessed, embarrassed. "Then it's time you learned," Ethan said, appearing from the stable leading a gentle-looking mare. "This is Daisy. She's old and lazy, perfect for beginners." Hope eyed the horse warily. "I'm not sure, can't live on a ranch and not ride," Ethan interrupted, extending his hand. "Come on, I won't let you fall." The warmth of his calloused palm against hers sent an unexpected flutter through Hope's stomach. With his help, she managed to get settled in the saddle, clutching the horn with white-knuckled fingers. "Relax," Ethan said, his hand resting briefly on her knee. "Daisy can sense your fear. Just breathe and sit tall." Gradually, Hope found her balance. By the time they reached the north pasture, she was beginning to enjoy herself, marveling at how differently the landscape looked from horseback. They stopped near a small stream where the cattle were drinking. Clara dismounted to pick wildflowers, leaving Hope and Ethan sitting on their horses watching the herd. "You did well," Ethan said. "For a first-time rider." Hope smiled. "I had a good teacher." Ethan's eyes held hers for a long moment. "You're full of surprises, Hope Richards." "How so?" "You come all this way to marry a man you never met. When that falls through, instead of giving up, you make a new plan. Now here you are, riding a horse and living on a cattle ranch." His expression was difficult to read. Most city women would have been on the first train east. Hope considered this. "I suppose I've never been one to give up easily. My mother taught me that." "She must have been quite a woman." "She was." Hope's voice softened. "She raised me alone after my father died in the war. Worked her fingers to the bone sewing for rich ladies who often treated her poorly. But she never complained, never stopped trying to give me a better life." Ethan nodded slowly. "My mother was like that too. Frontier life wasn't easy on her, but she never regretted following my father west." He gestured to the land around them. "She used to say that even on the hardest days, she could look at this view and find peace." In that moment, watching the sunlight glint off Ethan's hair, the gentle way his hands held the reins, Hope felt something shift inside her, the first tentative stirrings of feelings she hadn't expected to find. As September gave way to October, those feelings grew. Hope found herself looking forward to the brief moments when she and Ethan would talk over breakfast, or in the evenings when he would sometimes sit on the porch, watching the sunset. He rarely spoke about himself, but occasionally she caught glimpses of the man beneath the stoic rancher exterior. "Did you always want to raise cattle?" she asked one evening as they shelled peas on the porch. Ethan's hands stilled for a moment. "No, wanted to be a lawyer once. Even started studying back east before my father got sick. Came home to help, then after he died." He shrugged. "Someone had to keep the place going. You gave up your dream, changed it," Ethan corrected. "Dreams can do that. What about you? Was marrying a stranger and moving west your dream?" Hope smiled ruefully. "Not exactly. But after my mother died, Boston held nothing for me but memories and limited prospects. Edmund's letters offered something new, a purpose, a place to belong. And now—" Hope looked out at the landscape. She'd come to love the rolling hills bathed in the golden glow of sunset, the distant mountains etched against the sky. "Now I'm finding my own purpose." Their eyes met, and Hope felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. For a brief moment, she thought Ethan might say something more, but Clara called from inside the house, breaking the spell. Clara's wedding approached rapidly. The dress alterations were complete, transforming the already beautiful gown into something that fit Clara perfectly. Hope had grown fond of Ethan's sister, whose bright personality and enthusiasm for life were infectious. "You know," Clara said during their final fitting, "my brother hasn't smiled this much in years." Hope concentrated on pinning the veil in place. "The ranch seems to be doing better." "That must ease his mind," Clara laughed softly. "It's not the ranch that's making him smile, Hope. It's you." Hope's hands faltered. "I'm sure you're mistaken. I grew up with Ethan. He doesn't let people in easily, especially after losing our parents and then nearly losing the ranch. But he watches you when you're not looking. I've seen it." Hope's heart raced at the possibility. She'd become increasingly aware of her own feelings for Ethan, his quiet strength, his unwavering dedication to his land and the people who depended on him, the rare smile that transformed his face. But she'd convinced herself it was merely gratitude and admiration, nothing more. Even if that were true, Hope said carefully, I'm his employee. Clara rolled her eyes. This isn't Boston, Hope. Out here, people find happiness where they can. No one would think twice about a rancher courting his housekeeper if that's what you both wanted. The wedding day dawned clear and crisp. The entire town seemed to turn out for the event, filling the small church to capacity. Hope sat near the back, watching Clara walk down the aisle on Ethan's arm, both siblings smiling broadly. During the reception at the town hall, Hope helped serve the food she'd spent days preparing. She was arranging a platter of cookies when Ethan appeared at her side. You should be celebrating, he said, not working. I don't mind, Hope replied. Besides, I hardly know anyone. You know me. Ethan held out his hand. Dance with me. The musicians were playing a waltz and couples were already swirling around the makeshift dance floor. Hope hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. Ethan led her confidently, one hand warm against her waist. Clara looks happy, he said, nodding toward his sister who was dancing with her new husband. She does, Hope agreed. Dr. Winters seems like a good man. He is. Ethan's eyes returned to Hope's face. Makes me realize I've been putting off my own happiness for too long. Hope's breath caught. What do you mean? Before Ethan could answer, a commotion at the door interrupted them. 3 men burst in, guns drawn. Hope recognized them immediately as trouble hard-faced men with cold eyes. Forrester, the leader called out. Time to settle our business. The music stopped abruptly. Ethan stepped in front of Hope protectively. Ryder, Ethan said evenly, this is my sister's wedding. Take your grievance elsewhere. The man called Ryder sneered. Thought we made ourselves clear. Either you sell us that water rights land or there'll be consequences. You've ignored our warnings. Hope suddenly understood the source of some of Ethan's troubles. These men wanted his land and had been pressuring him. Perhaps they were even behind the cattle thefts. The sheriff stepped forward. Put those guns away, Ryder. This is neither the time nor place. Stay out of this, Sheriff, Ryder warned. This is between me and Forrester. Ethan's voice was cold. I told you before that land isn't for sale. Not to you, not to anyone. Ryder's face darkened. Then I reckon we'll have to persuade you. He raised his gun, aiming it at Ethan. Everything happened quickly after that. The sheriff drew his weapon. Someone screamed. Hope saw Ryder's finger tighten on the trigger and acted without thinking, shoving Ethan sideways. The bullet whistled past, embedding itself in the wall. Chaos erupted. The sheriff and his deputy quickly overpowered Ryder and his men, disarming them. No one was hurt, but the wedding celebration was effectively over, guests departing in worried whispers. Back at the ranch that night, Ethan paced the porch while Hope sat quietly, still shaken by the day's events. You could have been killed, Ethan said abruptly, stopping in front of her. Why would you do something so foolish? Hope met his gaze steadily. For the same reason you stood in front of me when they entered. Some instincts are beyond reasoning. Ethan's expression softened. He knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. Hope, I've been meaning to tell you something. Today made me realize I can't put it off any longer. Her heart hammered in her chest. What is it? When you first came here, I saw you as someone who needed help, a solution to my problems in the house. But these past weeks... He took a deep breath. I find myself looking forward to seeing you each morning. I think about you when I'm out with the cattle. I watch you hanging laundry or cooking, and I realize I've never felt this way about anyone before. Hope could hardly breathe. Ethan, let me finish, he said gently. I know you came here to marry another man. I know your plans fell apart, but I'm hoping I'm hoping you might consider building a new future here, with me." Hope's eyes filled with tears. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" Ethan smiled, that rare, transformative smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. "I'm asking if you might consider becoming my wife. Not right away if you need time, but someday." Hope thought of the letter she'd written just last week to her friend in Boston, describing the unexpected turn her life had taken. How she'd come west seeking security and found something far more precious, a place where she truly belonged, work that fulfilled her, and a man who saw her strength rather than her vulnerability. "I don't need time," she whispered, reaching out to touch his face. "My answer is yes." Ethan's smile widened. He leaned forward, his lips meeting hers in a kiss both tender and full of promise. When they broke apart, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I never expected you," he murmured. "You came here for a different life with a different man." "And found a better one instead," Hope finished for him. 2 weeks later, with Ryder and his men awaiting trial in the county jail, Hope stood in the small church where Clara had been married, wearing a dress she'd remade from one of her Boston gowns. Clara stood beside her as witness and doctor. Winters beside Ethan. The ceremony was simple, the words ancient and binding. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Hope felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was not the future she had traveled west to find, but it was infinitely more precious for being unexpected. That evening, as they sat on the porch of what was now their home, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, Ethan took Hope's hand. "Happy?" he asked simply. Hope smiled, thinking of the journey that had brought her here, the courage it had taken to leave everything familiar behind, the disappointment of arriving to find her intended future gone, and the unexpected joy of discovering a new one. "More than I ever imagined possible," she replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. As twilight deepened into night, Hope Richards Forrester looked out at the land that had become her home, at the stars beginning to appear in the vast Montana sky. She had come west as a mail-order bride, waiting for a future that never arrived. Instead, she had built her own future with a man who valued her courage as much as her kindness, her determination as much as her gentleness. It wasn't the story she had planned to write. It was better. 5 years later, Hope stood on that same porch, watching Ethan teaching their 3-year-old son to ride his first pony in the yard. Their daughter, just beginning to toddle, clutched at Hope's skirts, babbling excitedly at the sight of her brother and father. The Forrester ranch had prospered under their joint care. The herd had grown back to its former size, and the new barn gleamed red against the landscape. Hope's vegetable garden flourished, providing food for their table and extra to sell in town. She still sewed for folks in Silver Creek, her reputation for fine work spreading even to neighboring communities. Life wasn't always easy. Drought, harsh winters, and the occasional rustler still presented challenges. But they faced each obstacle together, their bond strengthening through every trial. As Ethan lifted their son off the pony and set him on the ground, the boy ran toward Hope, his face alight with excitement. "Mama, did you see? I rode all by myself." Hope knelt to embrace him. "I saw, sweetheart." "You were very brave." Ethan followed more slowly, swinging their daughter up into his arms as he reached them. His face, once so serious, now easily broke into smiles. The lines around his eyes spoke of laughter rather than worry. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, noticing Hope's contemplative expression. Hope smiled, gazing at the family they had created together. "I was thinking about how sometimes the best futures are the ones we never planned for." Ethan nodded, understanding in his eyes. He leaned down to kiss her softly. "I thank God every day that Edmund Blake's future became mine instead." Hope's heart filled with a now familiar warmth. She had traveled west seeking security and found love instead, a love born of shared work and mutual respect, of quiet evenings and difficult challenges overcome together. The sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the land they both cherished. Their children's laughter echoed in the clear mountain air, a sound that never failed to make Hope's heart swell with gratitude. This was the future she had waited for, though she hadn't known it then, not a promise made in letters between strangers, but a reality built day by day with the man who had taught her that some journeys, no matter how difficult their beginnings, led exactly where they were meant to.